So next up, our HITLAB's own Prem Sreenivasan is going to interview Dr. Sachin Shah and learn a lot more about what's going on in the digital health ecosystem with life science companies today. Thank you, Prem, for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Shah.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Stan, and welcome, Dr. Shah. Terrific to have you on board and to hear your insights. So as we get started, Dr. Shah is from GSK, and I want to give you a few minutes to give us a background about your impressive history. The audience would be very interested in it, and I'll let you start that portion of the session.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Prem. Yeah, so I'm Sachin. I'm currently the global medical partner for digital health and devices at GSK Consumer Health.
I think you may be on mute.
Always happens. So, sorry. Thank you very much, Prem. So yeah, my name is Sachin. I'm the global medical partner for digital health and devices at GSK Consumer Healthcare. I'm a clinician by background. I was a gastroenterologist in East London in the UK. And I left medicine around 2018 to join the ever-evolving specialty of digital health. Self-taught myself from software development and joined my previous role at Medopad, now known as Humor, and did lots of different things there, from clinical safety, regulation, product and design, and then ultimately fell into the natural role of clinical lead for various products, and whether that be the idea and creation of novel digital biomarkers all the way through to their remote patient monitoring platform, notably during COVID in their pan-London deployment to help monitor patients at home. I left to join GSK, and I basically my role at GSK is working with a specialist digital health team built within GSK Consumer as sort of their clinical digital health specialist. I guess the easiest way to explain it would be a medical affairs type role, but the specialty is digital health technology. And that really focuses on helping create novel digital products, as well as the clinical validation, the deliverance of real-world evidence in decentralized studies, and just helping the wider GSK consumer healthcare business get their mind around how to develop digital products and generate evidence for existing products using digital tools or clinically validating digital tools that they've come up with in their R&D labs.
That sounds really, really impressive. The fact that you're going from software design to clinical lead to biomarkers, and you've covered the entire spectrum. I think I can keep you here for the next 2 days, and the audience will be very interested in learning a lot more about the wealth of information that you bring to the session. Now, as we get started, you have a very unique perspective because you're based in the UK. And I want you to take a step and tell us a little bit from the global standpoint and, from the GSK big pharma standpoint, how you see this space moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, a fantastic question. And, obviously I speak on behalf of GSK, but I've seen it with various other, contacts within the life sciences area globally. Everyone is keen to utilize digital health technology within their day-to-day business and the value that it adds to, the wide portfolio of products and, compounds that pharma companies have. I think initially a lot of companies were probably just trying to jump on the bandwagon, but I think COVID has really emphasized actually how much value these digital products can provide to companies and to, obviously their consumers, as the patients that use the products that these companies produce. So actually what we've seen is a twofold. Lots of, previous, classic R&D budget spent on digital products that are sitting on a shelf being, reviewed and actually seeing, actually, that's an amazing product. And we now know a lot more about this space as to what to do with it, i.e. in terms of commercialization and getting it into the hands of people that need it, but also actually spending more time on actually how can we create a really robust digital health value proposition that bolsters our existing portfolio of products. And it's really exciting to see lots and lots of big companies that, when we talk about healthcare, obviously you have your academic centers and, the research side of healthcare, which obviously is a large part, but obviously pharma and life sciences play a huge role in the healthcare that everyday people experience on a day-to-day end. So seeing that really, huge amount of funding and time and resources being put into digital health technology is really exciting to see. Because ultimately, a lot of the money in this business comes from big companies. So the fact that they're getting aboard, partnering with these startups that have really innovative ideas, really groundbreaking ways of, revolutionizing the way we deliver healthcare. It's a really exciting space to be in at the moment.
Oh, that's brilliant. So as you experience all these various efforts in all these organizations that you're partnered with, can you describe a little bit about the validation process, the clinical validation process that you think is appropriate as we emerge in the digital health area?
Yeah, I mean, once again, fantastic question. And, clinical validation is something that, as per all new areas, sort of, I would say, probably taken a bit of a back step. At the forefront of digital health technology, you have sort of wellness apps, stuff that people can download from their smartphones, for mindfulness, sleeping, diet, exercise, all those sorts of, really important holistic factors of health, but don't necessarily require clinical validation. As we move into the space, recently, the guidelines especially around the UK have changed in terms of what a medical device sits in terms of regulatory classification. Naturally, we're going to see more demand from the regulators, the prescribing clinicians, the healthcare providers, and the users into that there are hundreds of products that all say the same thing. Prove that yours actually does what you say it does. And then that opens a whole can of worms as to what is the right way to clinically validate a digital tool. We all, as soon as you think of clinical validation or, evidence-based practice, we think, randomized control trial, double-blinded, but actually they're not necessarily the best tools to show that digital health tools work. And it's about working with all the experts in this area. So obviously the people in pharma, huge clinical operations departments and researchers that have been doing this for years on years and end. Big, academic centers with huge epidemiology centers such as, Oxford, Cambridge, Johns Hopkins, Dartmouth, that, have now got reams of, epidemiologists that subspecialize in digital health, and just coming up with the right sort of quasi-research methodology that fit the bill to validate these studies. And I think, obviously being from the UK and obviously very closely following what the NHS and NICE and HEE are doing, NICE, have been working on, have, subsequently released edited versions of their evidence standard frameworks for getting digital health products implemented within the NHS. And it's a really, obviously there's lots and lots of sort of room for discussion because not every product fits in a nice little box. But getting that conversation started is really, really good. And, anytime we talk to any startups or, startups ask me for any advice, I always tell them, keep how you're going to validate this product at the beginning of your journey. So whilst you're building this product, and I don't mean to slow it down and etc., but if you have all the right pieces in place at the beginning of your journey, when you're going to submit to a regulatory body, when you're, providing, presenting your case to a, a national organization like the NHS, that they're not suddenly then like, oh, but we need evidence at the last hurdle. You've got that and you've been building it throughout your development of your product. And the same applies for within, life science companies as well.
No, that's very insightful. Thank you so much for that. And I think you have, you have segued into the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is about the real world evidence and decentralized trials. So I will let you offer your thoughts on that area as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think everyone now knows what a decentralized or a virtual study is because of COVID. And I think as a result, I think everyone's just been blown away. Like at GSK, studies that would normally take, up to a year to be recruited, because we've, obviously changed the nature of what the study is going to show, obviously, because it's different to like a randomized control study or whatever, but recruitment's done in 2 or 3 days because of these digital products that help just speed up the way in which we can deliver this research. Now, one could argue, yeah, but maybe the research isn't as robust as a more traditional trial, but we're still at very early stages. I'm sure the very first ever documented randomized control trial probably had loads of flaws and biases and didn't have the statistical models to back up the confounding factors, but we'll get there. And I think that COVID has allowed companies and regulatory bodies and academics and researchers and anyone and everyone to actually take back, actually look hard at decentralized studies and go, actually, you know what? These are valuable and these are really important in actually getting a better sense of what is being done in the real world. We don't need to hold the participants' hands and guide them through the study. Actually, let's see what our product does in the study. And obviously, I say this with the caveat that there will always be a role for traditional clinical methodologies, especially with your traditional, biologics and your compounds. You need to have those. The only way we can make sure they're safe. But by conducting parallel real-world evidence studies at the same time, you are just bolstering your evidence base for the efficacy of your product. In digital health trials, I don't ever think double-blinded randomized control studies are the way to go for digital health products. Like I caught the end of the last talk, but I think it was a remote patient monitoring platform. It's I don't think it's necessary. I think showing like nice prospective observational studies or retrospective observational studies that you've accounted for mitigating risk in terms of patient safety, I think those are very, very useful studies to get the ball rolling.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's very delightful. And as we transition through this pandemic and, with the Delta and other things that are coming through in different geographies, and I'm sure you're looking at it very closely from your standpoint as a medical doctor and in terms of your efforts, how do you see, what do you see some of the future things which are particularly transformative or that are going to stay with us as we go towards perhaps the next year or the next 5 years?
Yeah, and I think, what I say is probably, everyone's thinking on the same lines, but it's just that increased access to care. So, telemedicine, virtual calls, remote patient monitoring, virtual diagnostics. I just think those are now here for life. And I can't imagine anyone trying to revert back to, the original practicing models of care. We now are able to see more patients in the same amount of time and provide the same amount of care. And actually in countries like, I don't know, like the States, for example, where access to care is a really big problem because it's such a large country, digital medicine, your virtual consultations and remote patient monitoring just gives these people access to care that they never once would have dreamed of ever being accessible to, or just even bothering to, because they don't drive 2 hours there and 2 hours back for a 20-minute appointment. And also, I know obviously the UK, being a smaller country, is very good at this, but actually getting people access to tertiary level care or quaternary level care, because it's all virtually, actually reduces that cost greatly. So even if you just need a consultation with a renowned specialist that's working in Hong Kong, that's actually very reasonable now. It's not going to cost you an arm and a leg as it probably would have done pre-COVID. So I think we'll see an evolution of how this care is delivered virtually. I think obviously regulators are already very hot on how we need to make sure this is safe. And I think obviously a lot of the people that provide healthcare services are very mindful of patient safety. And I'm excited to see how this develops over the next, 1, 3, 5, 10 years.
That's delightful. It's certainly here to stay, and I think we're going to see more of this coming into the areas that are of most interest to us. And I know this HIMSS was a meeting here in the US, and I don't know if you had a chance to hear anything about it, or perhaps your colleagues from the US may have attended. If you had any takeaways or ideas or other types of outcomes that you would like to highlight, the audience will be happy to hear your thoughts on that front.
I'm really sorry, I haven't had a chance to attend any because of back-to-back meetings, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one of the things we're really interested as well, I'm just looking at some of the questions coming in on my LinkedIn page. People want to understand, how do they partner with you? How do they partner with your company? Because so many of the emerging technologies that are watching right now from around the world have a lot of different solutions. They have data analytics solutions, they have patient engagement solutions, and numbers of others. What's the best way to, how are you working with emerging technology companies in terms of the development of these models and the integration of them into what's happening with your company?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I can only speak for GSK, but we very much don't want to create, we obviously do want to create a product in-house, but a large part of what we do is partnering with, third-party vendors. So we're always looking for innovative solutions. The way it's worked so far is just being classical, LinkedIn reach out. And if it sounds interesting enough, we'll arrange a call and go from there, because I think the plan is get a library of potential partners. So when we come to a project, instead of having to start with the trawl of looking for companies, we're like, oh, actually, we talked to that company about, 6 months ago, and they would actually fit this bill perfectly. And that's what we've been doing at GSK. And obviously, I appreciate other companies do it differently. But just a simple reach out onto LinkedIn, for us, has been the way we've had access to various, startups or people working in that space.
That's incredible. And for people that are watching, what do you recommend they do in terms of contacting you? Do you recommend they contact you through your LinkedIn page, or do you want to give out your email to folks that are watching from all around the world?
No, I think LinkedIn is absolutely fine. I think, my manager's been doing it via LinkedIn. The people that run the sort of digital health incubator within GSK do it through LinkedIn as well. So LinkedIn's absolutely fine.
That's fantastic. And, certainly, I think the big thing here for Prem, and Prem, when you look at it, you've had a career that's gone with life sciences and now digital health as well. What's the best way from your standpoint that where you've seen a digital health technology integrate into a life science company?
No, I think it's a terrific question, Stan, and I think we've been learning right through the entire sessions that we had today, and particularly with reference to these partnerships and the early partnerships that are appropriate in the design of these strategies as we go forward, is probably a very critical step to map out the road and to make sure that there is that value add, so that particularly some of the regulatory lifts are appropriate as we transition in the product area. Perhaps Dr. Sachin, you want to add to that? Yeah, what are some of the watch outs that you think are appropriate as people start up in this space?
Yeah, I think, like I said it earlier, I think the biggest thing is, think about the whole picture of your product. Think about the regulatory piece, the clinical validation piece. Think about everything. Don't just rush to make a product and get it to market and then deal with it later. I think we're very lucky that we work in a market at the moment that maybe the evidence can come later, but that will change. That will change, and we will follow a similar pattern to traditional medicine. To start thinking about those roadmaps, and I don't mean you need to act on them, but even something like getting a roadmap down, getting the right people in the right conversation. So when you get to a point where you need to, or you should be wanting to validate a product and get it there, you have all the tools ready.
Oh, that sounds terrific.
And Sachin, we also have added Nathan, who is one of the leads for corporate innovation on the healthcare side for one of the world's largest incubators, PlugandPlay. They've launched companies like eBay and many others out there. And I wanted to again, not only introduce you to Nathan as well, but to talk about how these sorts of partnerships are formed. One of the things that we have seen at HITLAB over the last 10 years is that life science companies have not made their own digital therapeutics. They have not done real well in terms of really getting a large degree of adoption of healthcare apps that they have made. And so what it really comes down to is life science companies are needing these startups to partner with. You saw that with Behringer and Click Therapeutics, and you certainly saw that with Bayer and what they did with OneDrop on the diabetes side, and Merck with Livongo, et cetera. The list goes on and on. The biggest deals that have happened in life sciences have been by partnering with digital health technologies. And Nathan, again, the audience would love to hear a minute or two about your background as well, but and maybe we start there. Nathan, do you just want to do like a minute intro on yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, just a quick background on myself. So I'm Nathan Sundheimer. I work at Plug&Play Tech Center. I have two main roles there. So I lead U.S. healthcare partnerships. Then I also am one of the co-leads for our digital health accelerator here in North America. And basically what we do at Plug&Play is we connect the world's best startups with our national and global partners to bring new technologies and solutions to market faster to solve the most pressing challenges that are plaguing our industry.
And Nathan, just to give people an idea of how successful Plug&Play is, again, I have to admit, before I was out there 5 years ago, whatever it was, I'd never heard of Plug and Play. Again, I'm a Northeasterner. I've lived east of the Hudson River most of my life. And so I apologize for that. But, when you go to the Plug and Play facility, it's amazing. It's stunning. It's in Silicon Valley, the heart of Silicon Valley. And Nathan, talk a little bit about who has actually come out of the Plug and Play incubator over the last 20 years.
Sure. Really, over the last 20 years, we've expanded across multiple industries. So even though I'm just in health, we work across 18 different industries. Plug and Play does a couple things. So first of all, we have our investment arm, and our investment arm is extremely successful. They make about 220 investments a year. And over the last couple of years, or actually right now in our portfolio, we just eclipsed 21 unicorns across all those industries, Garden Health being our main one in health. But we've had numerous other startups that have gone through our program. Really the purpose of our accelerator is really to help each of these unique startups surpass whatever inflection point or achieve whatever sort of funding that they need to get to that next level. So we've been doing that, especially in health. We work with close to 200 startups per year throughout all of our programs across the world, and really helping them achieve whatever those objectives are.
Yeah, just stunning. And from your standpoint, when you look at a group like GSK, a top 3 life science company, how do you and your startups try to integrate into what they're doing in a way that's seamless and is done on a low friction basis, so that executives that are adopting Plug and Play emerging technologies can do it in a way that has less friction?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So really the way that we do these things is we would approach someone within GSK, like Sachin, for example, and we'd say, Sachin, there's a myriad of different solutions, but what is your main issue? What is your main pain point? And from that point, we would really define what that issue is or what that solution is that you're looking for. And that can be as broad or as narrow as you want that to be. But based off of that information, though, what we do is we go out and we source all around the world to find startups and solutions that ultimately fit the bill, whether they exist in your backyard or completely across the globe. And from that point, what we do is we facilitate these introductions between the startups and yourself. And then ultimately through a series of meetings, really kind of whittle down that list until you come and meet a startup that you actually feel can do some work with you. Beyond that, ultimately you and the startup decide any sort of engagement that you would like to do, whether that's a pilot, whether that's post-pilot engagement, whatever that is. But the thing is sometimes you can have all these wonderful meetings, you can meet some wonderful startups, and at the end of the day, you can say, it was really nice to meet you, but that's not exactly what we're looking for. And what we do at that point is we repeat the whole cycle over and over again until we find exactly what you and GSK would be looking for. I think you're on mute, Stan.
I am, yeah. No, I've got my 10-pound geriatric Yorkie barking at my door here in my home office, so I had to go on mute for it. But Sachin, from your side, what's the best way for startups and for emerging technology companies who have a real nice lift for life science companies? What's the best way for them to integrate into, or maybe you have some case studies that are public where GSK was able to integrate with some digital health tech companies and really fathom a way to integrate without friction?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest barrier and the biggest probably reason for phased adoption is the life sciences company's audit process. Lots of people are keen to get it going, and even the payers are ready to sign off, but ultimately all these big companies have to go through that audit process. And it goes back to what I was saying, and it probably sounds like I'm harping on about, but get everything up to scratch, your QMS, your ISO documentation, your HIPAA approval, or whatever regulatory bodies approval you need, all of that, because they're the only things that are going to slow. Currently, what we're seeing, they're the things that stop us from working with various vendors because they just don't come up to scratch when it comes to that audit process. I've never tried to run my own business. I've never tried to come up with my own innovative digital products and create a startup. And I can imagine that it's probably a chicken and egg. You need money to be able to do all that stuff, but to get money, they're saying we need all this stuff to be done. And we do appreciate that it's hard. And GSK has, depending on the products, the projects that we're undertaking with that startup, do definitely make allowances. And, the audit system's already been revalidated for digital health products because the traditional audit system just didn't work. But like I said, the simple things, the stuff that people should have. I think my favorite example is they're ISO compliant, meaning their QMS should be up to date. When we look at their QMS and it's not up to date, so we're like, how did you get ISO? Now, how is your ISO still certified? So simple things that should be ticking over. So that's the one bit of advice I'd give to anyone that's trying to integrate.
That's really helpful. And Prem, based on what you've seen in the past, is there, if in your medical affairs background, do you have an illustration of how some of these startups who are, more clinically oriented need to work with life science? Because you've worked now with HITLAB for a long time now. You've also worked with life science companies, so you understand the digital health ecosystem, startup side of things, as well as the more risk-averse enterprise class life science side of things. There are one or two things that you've identified in your experiences now that would portend as really good advice for digital health startups trying to work with enterprise class, heavily regulated life science companies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, like Sachin said previously, I think the roadmap is such a critical thing. And the value add that we get out that is offered by the technology and the solution, at the end of the day, it is patient centric. So if we can focus the discussion around the value add to the patient, I think it focuses the conversation and it makes the discussion a lot more richer, and is probably an important step. I think it's been stated in this session by these attendees and also by some of the previous attendees on how important it is to maintain that focus. So
Yeah,
perhaps
absolutely.
Nathan wants to add to it too.
Yeah, Nathan.
I completely agree with everything that you had to say, Prem.
And Nathan, from your lessons learned at HIMSS, tell us a little bit of background in terms of what are some of the three things or whatever that you did pick up by traveling to HIMSS this year.
Sure. So right off the bat with the keynote, they really kicked it off talking about the social determinants of health and health equity, and they served as major topics of discussion throughout the event, especially in terms of how do we improve healthcare for everybody. As we all know, the pandemic once again highlighted the need to serve our most vulnerable patients, and we must continue to leverage data and technology to do that. But we have to leverage the data and the knowledge that we've developed over the last couple of months to make sure that we are doing that effectively. But another thing is along those lines, we also have to continue to increase the availability and accessibility for telehealth and other virtual care services. And as you know, with those capabilities, there are a myriad of security and privacy issues that we must be cognizant of. So we just really have to make sure that we're augmenting those capabilities really to bridge the gap, both in terms of equity and the digital divide. And probably the last thing I'd say would be, that'd probably be like the security in the infrastructure and how it has to, they're not the sexiest of topics, but they always need to remain a top priority. I know just because we work with, we're working in a hybrid environment in some organizations, we have to prioritize our own security and privacy. We have to prioritize patient privacy. And so we just have to make sure that we are continuing to accommodate our IT teams to make sure that we aren't moving too fast in that sense. We have to make sure that we're protecting our own organizations.
No, that's really great to hear. And Sachin, cybersecurity has come up a number of times now in this review of HIMSS, and obviously HIMSS covered, I think the social determinants of health and really the digital divide there. There was a lot of coverage there around that, and then also cybersecurity. From what you're seeing within the life science community, are you seeing a new focus for life science companies on top of hospitals, really focusing on cybersecurity, given the fact that we had, first it was gas pipelines on the Mid-Atlantic, then it was meatpacking plants in the Upper Plains, and now it's school districts, as you're seeing. So whoever is doing this hacking, and there's all kinds of reports of where it's coming from, we won't speculate on that. That's really not our purpose. Our purpose is to really try to figure out how do we protect our critical healthcare infrastructure. We have patients with COVID, and then now other severe diseases that have been neglected over the last 18 months. And now we have school children, and we have, clinical trials. And how are we protecting, how are you seeing some of life sciences? You don't have to speak directly to GSK, but protecting the life science supply chain against hacking and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite new for most of the big companies. You know, it's not something that people have had to worry before. Everything was on closed servers. Everyone was working in offices. Clinical studies will be done on site. You know, and obviously companies are spending lots of money trying to bolster the infrastructure surrounding any data capturing, process or data transferring. You know, I don't have a large part of how they, what GSK have done specifically or to improve data security, but the role I do play is, ensuring that we adhere to the data, the various data governance laws and protections that whatever geography that we're working in have, and making sure that that is all it's all transparent. Everyone can see everything that's being done. And I think from a clinical point of view, I've been a real stickler for any sort of clinical study protocol that I'm reviewing, that data pathway is meticulously written down, whether or not an IRB needs it or not, or whoever wants to see it. Because I've seen IRB approvals where they just say, and data is secure as per ISO or whatever. But I make sure that, whoever's running the study, even if it's myself, that actually it's spelled out. So everyone that is part of that study, even in the ICF, they see actually from the moment I enter data on my phone or whatever, I can see exactly where it's going at all points.
That sounds like it's really bolted down, which is wonderful to hear. One of the technologies HITLAB has studied over the last 12 months or so is a company called BlockCube, which is, again, a former executive on the R&D side from Novartis, Rama Rao, started up BlockCube, which is a blockchain-based clinical trial system. And I guess, Nathan, have you seen any startups, any emerging technologies that are using blockchain for managing clinical trials these days?
Definitely BlockCube. Ramo was actually in our spring accelerator program, so I had the opportunity to get to know him and BlockCube itself very well. But I do have to say, as far as that space goes, Ramo is doing he and his team are doing an incredible job, and they're really starting to separate themselves from the pack. And it's been a lot of fun, and I continue to follow his work, even though they've completed the program. But it's still really fun to see all the things that he's doing in these decentralized clinical trials.
That's fantastic. And Sachin, have you seen a blockchain clinical trial system come along the way that has that kind of security around it?
I have not. It sounds absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to learn or read more about it.
Yeah, you should definitely meet Rama.
We'll definitely we'll make the introduction, no doubt about it. Yeah, they're seeing tremendous success, not just in North America, but also the EU as well as South Asia. So Rama's done a great job at diffusing his technology all over the world, and it's exciting. And Nathan, talk about some of what you saw at HIMSS that was super exciting, not just the lessons learned, but some of the technologies that you saw that just really affected you and really impressed you.
Sure. To be quite honest, I was kind of running between meeting to meeting, so I didn't have the opportunity to check out as many exhibits or see as many startups as I would have liked. But the one thing I do want to mention, though, is it was so refreshing to see all of these passionate individuals just kind of buzzing around all over the floor, just showing their technologies or presenting their solutions or offering advice or just having conversations about what they're working on. I think that was just so fascinating. And I know ultimately, like, that's not one of the up and coming technologies that you were looking for, but it's really those sorts of interactions that really spark those sorts of innovations.
No, I think that's critical, right? That we're seeing not only these on-site live in-person events happening again, but that you're able to pick up some of that notion there as well. And if there was, in terms of what would be interesting for Sachin and our audience watching from the life science ecosystem, what did you learn at HIMSS that would be where there would be some good partnerships for life science companies, medical device companies, and those folks?
From the partnership side, I'd probably say, and this may seem extremely mundane, but as it's not really related to like a specific topic or presentation, and it gets a little bit more to the conversational side. But I'd like to highlight that one morning I grabbed coffee with my good friend, Alan Pitt, who's at the Barrow Neurological Institute. And toward the end of our conversation, he gave me some paternal advice that I found to be pretty helpful. And I think it's important for every one of us when we're having these partnership discussions. And he says, in any conversation, you should be asking 4 questions. Who are you? What do you do? What is your challenge? And how can I help? And as we all know, we're part of this very innovative and collaborative ecosystem. And I think it's really important to hit those questions as we try to hit the nail on the head on the challenges that we're aiming to tackle together, and really immerse ourselves and put each other in each other's shoes, so we can understand how to define and solve our pain points. And especially like when we're talking about the multitude of centricities that exist in our ecosystem as well. So as I said, even though that's may seem extremely mundane, it's an extremely important reminder of why we were all there, and that's to help each other and drive innovation in the industry forward.
No, it's fantastic. And so Prem, we're going to ask you those questions in a minute. And Sachin, we're going to ask you that question right now. I mean, I think you're in the midst of it right now with GSK. You've got a lot of challenges on your plate. What would you say is your number 1 challenge right now, either you yourself within your department or broader digital transformation across GSK that is publicly known and the CEO has talked about?
I think the biggest focus, and it is a challenge, is just how do companies like GSK that are world leaders in healthcare become world leaders in digital healthcare? And you know, the tech companies obviously have a very good platform to deliver digital technology. GSK and other life sciences farm companies have lots of ability to deliver, obviously, healthcare, world-leading healthcare and products, etc. How do we find the right sort of gold mine when it comes to creating digital products? You know, it's not as simple as like a biologic or you know, a compound where you're like, oh, you know, I've got a cancer, I need to create a pill that will cure this cancer. There's no such thing for a digital product that, you know, has that need. So it's like, how do I identify what that need is? How do we find the various partners in this space, either small, middle, or huge partners? And then how do we take this product to launch and make sure that consumers actually want to use product and wouldn't rather just take a pill or et cetera, et cetera. And they're, you know, some of the really big challenges that we're coming. You know, we spend a lot of time trying to develop persona of the target population and what we're trying to treat, which I think is, you know, novel in a field of healthcare where your personas are very well known in diabetes, heart disease, oncology. So I think that's the biggest challenge that, you know, somewhere like GSK is facing. Okay,
wonderful. So Prem, we're going to ask you now, what challenges are you facing as the head of medical affairs at HITLAB, and you know, again, testing and learning about digital health tools all over the world?
No, I think it's been a delightful session, and you know, thanks to Sachin and Nathan and previous speakers as well. I think some of the key takeaways were particularly with reference to this accessibility and the ability to improve diversity in the trial process and to gain that real world evidence. I think the faster we transition to incorporating some of that, I think the solutions for the patients will become a lot more richer and has perhaps a more global footprint. I think those are the exciting things that I see, and obviously the data privacy that goes as part of that process are some of the pain points. So I think the next few years are going to offer us the definitions on some of this as regulatory processes come together. So I think based on all the leaders that we have currently, Sachin and Nathan and many others in the session, I think we're going to see a lot of great progress. So I do want to thank each of you for taking the time, and do appreciate it, the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
That's super. And thank you, Prem, and thank you all. A virtual round of applause from the audience today for a terrific interview and panel on understanding what was happening at HIMSS and what our life science groups like GSK understanding in their quest to meet the next round of challenges in not only delivering really efficacious clinical trials, but also delivering medicines around the world. Thank you all.